Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Now that's a phrase that feels fitting because this episode is all about shows. We've all heard the saying, the show must go on. It's the rallying cry for the entertainment world. No matter what happens, the curtain rises, the lights stay on, and the performance has to continue. But what happens when it really shouldn't? Now, stopping a show is never easy. When there are perhaps tens or hundreds of thousands of people gathered, calling a show off isn't just disappointing, it can be dangerous to do. And yet, sometimes pressing pause or stop is the most responsible decision of all. My guest, Iain Morrison, knows this better than anyone. Over 35 years, he's run some of Australia's biggest events, from Taylor Swift and U2 concerts to public spectacles with crowds of over 200,000 people. Iain's been the one making those tough calls, but when the show can go on, and when it simply can't. Now, I'm no event manager, but I love going to shows of all kinds. They are fulfilling, thought-provoking, and wonderfully human. I get so much inspiration not just from what's on stage or being performed, but from the way shows are put together. The choreography of people, the magic that when it's done well feels effortless on the surface, but is built on extraordinary skill and preparation behind the scenes. And in this episode, Iain shares what really happens backstage, the human decision-making under pressure, and why the events industry is starting to talk more openly about burnout, risk and resilience. We also dive into Iain's latest adventure, a tech startup that's using 3D planning to make events safer and smarter. So with all of that said, this show needs to go on. It's my discussion with Iain Morrison on when the show shouldn't go on.
Iain, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you, Christian. Great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. We're on opposite sides of the world, and I came across you on social media, writing some amazing stuff that I want to come on and talk about. But before we do that, can you just tell my listeners a little bit about what you do?
I was for 35 years an event manager, looking after major concerts, music festivals, big public spectaculars around Australia. I started out very young out of high school or still in high school. I had to select an extracurricular activity, and I thought backstage crew sounded fun. Had no idea what it involved, but the school had a great theatre, and I had this amazing opportunity to start at a young age with some kids that were a little bit older than me, but working in the industry, and I got exposed to it, and I loved it, and never left. I went to university, studied production, stage management, and then went and got a job at the Opera House straight out of university. And for the first sort of 8 years of my career, worked at the Opera House and Opera Australia, and then moved into major events. And I got headhunted into corporate, onto the Olympics, and then into big public outdoor events. So, 20,000 people was an average event for me. And we got up to 200,000 people plus. And, a small day at the office would be around the 5,000 people mark. So big outdoor major events where you have a lot of risk exposure. So whether you've got, nowadays terrorism and malintent, but you've also got things like crowd crush and a whole heap of risks that people don't necessarily think about when they're planning these events or really, going to the events. So I've had a lot of time and exposure to that stuff. And about 2 years ago, we just sort of started on a technology startup in the event space. And I stopped delivering major events, and I'm now a tech startup. I'm CEO of a tech and co-founder of a tech startup company. And a completely weird world that I've never been in. It's quite uncomfortable some days because, here I have developed and planned and delivered for 35 years these major events. Now we're developing a planning tool for them, but it's a very different space to operate in. So quite exciting, but, a very big transformation.
So many things I want to pick up. Like, you can just tell the passion in your voice when you talk about this stuff. But I'm fascinated because most kids, when they're growing up, if you sort of ask the average one, it's kind of they want to be on stage, right? That seems the big dream. And yet you went backstage. What was it that appealed to you about that? Because, like, I can just, it's obviously you care about it a lot, and you did, but what was it that excited you about being behind the scenes as opposed to in front of them?
I hated being on stage. I think nothing terrified me more at the time, but I really liked the idea of the theatre and creating these stories and being a part of just something that was really exciting, that you give people a release from their everyday when they go to these things. And, people, they love it. They respond well. They're very energetic and exciting environments to work in. And you have a feeling of satisfaction when you work in the theatre or on events, things like that. I think people it's a big buzz. It's, that's something that even if you're backstage is hard to explain.
And I love the fact that you just casually dropped in, right, that your first job was at probably one of the most iconic buildings in the world, but certainly the most iconic building in Australia. How did that happen? Because I imagine there's loads of people that want to work somewhere like that. Did that just fall into your lap, or were you specifically keen to go there? How did that happen?
Well, truth be told, I kind of blagged my way in there because I was still at university.
Such a great Aussie response. I love that.
I was still at university doing my third year, and we had to do a secondment for the third year. And I had a couple of friends that were working at the Opera House, and I said, look, do you reckon your boss would let me come and do a secondment there? And they were like, yeah. But he actually went, I don't really want to do secondments. How about you just come and work and I'll fill out whatever paperwork you need? And so I actually got a job, but I never told the university I was getting paid. You did stuff. I did my third year. I was meant to do, I don't know, 10 weeks secondment, and I pretty well stayed at the Opera House and just went home to do exams and major classes and things like that, and blagged my way through. And I think my university lecturer was, because I'd been working in the industry for so long beforehand, had such a diverse experience, that I kind of think he was like, oh, thank God that bloke's gone and my lessons will quiet down a bit, because I was always that guy going, really, I don't know if that's the way it works, mate.
I love that.
I think he was all on my side for going and getting the job and just coming back and doing the exams.
I love that. I wasn't expecting that answer, but I loved it. That's great. And so the sort of, I mean, you've mentioned some numbers. I mean, you said sort of 5,000 was a small number, and we're sort of into the 20,000 and 30,000s. So we're talking like, you're talking like tours of global artists, those kinds of things at the top end of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I did tell a bit of a furphy. We did a Foo Fighters concert once for 350 people, but yes, generally, they were those artists doing, Adele, Taylor Swift, U2, the Rolling Stones. We did a lot of big public events in Australia. So the Sydney Harbour Bridge 75th, we did Australia Days, we did a series called the Domain Concert Series, which every summer in Sydney was set up in the bit like Hyde Park in the UK. We set a big stage up and we'd do concerts for 20, 30,000 people each weekend. So that was the bread and butter. Those large festivals, concerts and public events over the last 30 odd years.
When I think about those events, I love going to them, but in a way it's crazy that we get that many, but when you start to think about it from an enjoyment perspective, it's insane, it's amazing, right? But when you think about it from a risk perspective, and this leads on to what you're doing now, it's kind of crazy that almost that we're allowed to do that, right? You can get that many people together, because when you've got that scale of people, things aren't always going to go according to plan. There are going to be challenges there. And so a part of me just sits there and goes, it's astonishing these things are allowed to happen, right? You would think in a world that was sort of hyper regulated and whatever else, that there'd be a point where you just go, we shouldn't be doing this sort of thing because the risks are too great to society. And yet the joy that we get from it is so we sort of, I don't know, it just always amazes me that they're allowed to go on. Does that make sense?
It does. We did an event back in, I think it was 2008 and 2009 it was, called Festival First Night in Sydney. It was for the Sydney Festival. And a bloke by the name of Fergus Lenihan was the festival director. And his plan was to make the city come alive with people and festival and entertainment. We have no idea how many people were in the city, but the police said, we need to shut it down. There were that many people just filling the streets of Sydney. The Domain, I've got photos of people hanging off light poles to see stages. It was crazy, just the amount of people in the city. And I don't think you'd ever be allowed to replicate anything like that in this day and age. But still, we look back on that. I put a post up not long ago about it, and we're just like, it was just crazy, the amount of people, but it was this huge buzz and excitement. And if you sort of looked at it retrospectively on paper, you'd probably, there's a lot of risk there that we managed. Like, and don't get me wrong when I say we were lucky to avoid, we manage risk quite firmly. But at the same point in time, with big public events like that, where it's just open, there was no tickets, there was no fence, there was just everyone come into the city, have a great time. We didn't know if we were going to get 20,000 or 200,000 or 2 million. And frankly, I don't think to this day anybody's really got a solid idea of how many people were there, but it was well over 150, 200,000 people in this part of the city we're in. And I just don't think you'd get away with that anymore.
And I'm assuming, as a sort of like concert goer, right, I get to see my side of it, and one is sort of aware of things like security checks and whatever. I'm assuming these things now are very tightly regulated as to what needs to happen, the clearances that you need, the limitations on venue, all that sort of stuff now, very, very tightly controlled.
Interestingly, in most countries in the world, events are still not regulated. So there is no...
Wow.
There's no overarching regulation that says, here is what you must have in place and here are the qualifications you must have to manage an event. So you will find the majority of event managers around the world, and I'll put in I know we're not doing videos, but the little quote brackets, untrained, they're unregulated. So there's no sort of nothing in place that says you must have this, this and this. There are regulations around what we do, so, risk management, some anti-terror, especially in the UK now with Martin's Law coming in. That's a sign of what regulation looks like, but that only covers one small part. So that's an anti-terror regulation, essentially. It doesn't really regulate on how crowd management must be performed or risk management. But again, there's individual risk management standards, but nothing that says when you're running an event, here are the criteria you must meet. And that kind of will come in at a local council level or a city level or a state level. There will be some overarching guidance there, but no regulation. And, I think I'm not a huge advocate for over-regulation, but I am a huge advocate for standards to be applied to events, wherever they occur. So it's an interesting conversation in the events industry, one I kind of spark the debate on every now and again. I like to pull the pin and throw the hand grenade in the room. And
which is why we're talking, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And, there are things people don't like talking about because it's awkward, right? And regulation is one of those awkward things because nobody wants regulation. But at the same point in time, you get to a point where you need regulation. So there's a fine balance there. And I think good event planning organizations and professionals understand that they have a responsibility to have the right things in place to ensure safety. And a lot of the time, people like their insurer will also dictate that they're in place. But I would hazard a guess that if you audited a lot of events in this day and age, they still would not cut the mustard.
Wow. And I think the first post of yours I came across on LinkedIn was a fascinating one where I'll paraphrase it slightly and probably get it wrong. So correct me with it. But I read it and the conclusion, the traditional phrase is sort of the show must go on. And of course, that's a very show busy thing, right? We need to keep the show on the road. And so that's a well understood thing. And you'd written a post that effectively said there are times where the show mustn't go on. And you were saying that circumstances could occur where you might need to call it off. And knowing what those are in advance, because you're likely to be stressed in the moment, is absolutely critical. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought it was super interesting. And this is why I loved talking to you, because you were going underneath and kind of going, let's talk about those things that are a little bit awkward and difficult. And this idea of planning for when the show shouldn't go on.
It's well known that when you're in the heat of a moment, the human brain just either freezes, flight.
We do some really dumb shit.
You need to have processes and procedures in place to guide you through the decision-making process when something goes wrong. And if you do major events for long enough, something's going to go wrong. Somebody's going to have a heart attack. Somebody's going to, have an issue on stage where, there's a problem and you need to stop the show. And you can't just make it up on the spot and go, oh, okay, how are we going to stop the show? We've got 50,000 people here. You're not going to log them. It's going to be right. We've had situations where we've known there's going to be a problem hours in advance. And the first response is always from the police to bring in riot squads and horses and backups, because they know what's the likely response of the crowd when you're going to stop this metal festival. They're going to riot, right? And there's years of history and data to back that up. So what I encourage people to do is to think about what that situation is. We call it a show stop, and to put procedures and policies in place to know, but also to brief everyone. This is your responsibility. These are the people that can stop the show. These are the reasons for which they can stop it. And this is how we're going to communicate in that moment where you do need to stop it. But not only that, you need to think about how you're going to restart it, because believe it or not, it's not easy to just restart an event halfway through for 50,000 people when the house lights are on and, the ushers don't know what, and security in the crowd don't know necessarily what's going on. They're getting tidbits of information, but, they need to be told now, we're going to restart in 10 minutes, bring everybody back in that's at the food, or, communicate this message. And so it's really about that, getting those procedures and policies in place to communicate beforehand, because again, it's surprising even in this day and age, the amount of event planners that don't have those show stop procedures in place, even for small events. If you're doing a conference for 1,000 people and somebody has a heart attack in the front row, how are you going to stop the presenter on stage while you get medical help to that person in the front row? It doesn't just happen in the moment. And, for us, there was always a limit or a point at which we hand over to the local authorities. So the emergency responders. So generally the police chief or forward commander would be in the room with us in a control room. And we would say, sir, ma'am, this needs to go to you. Or they would say, we're going to take over this situation now. And you'd go, excuse my French. There were times where you'd be, oh my God, thank you for doing that, because it reaches the extent of my experience or the person running the event's experience in responding to a problem that's occurring. And funnily enough, just today, I put out on LinkedIn a decision-making matrix that is designed to help people understand how to make decisions and where their decision sits in the decision-making tree, because there's always somebody with overarching command or responsibility, right? And at some point, you need to be able to say, this is not my bag. It needs to go up the chain to the police commander or to the fire services or whoever's responsibility it is. If it's a train problem, it needs to go to the train people. So it's about knowing when that moment is and what that trigger point is, that it's no longer worth, or you're no longer qualified to make that decision.
And I love that idea of giving people guidance in the moment, but I guess it's sort of also just giving them parameters. So you could sort of make rash decisions, but also knowing it's okay to hand it over to someone else. There's a degree of comfort there. And a sort of, you're literally, what you're doing is thinking through this human in this particular situation. What are the pressures that they're under? And pressure number one, you don't want to be the person calling this thing off because of the knock-on consequences. You might sort of worry about what you're doing, and it's kind of easier just to keep the show going, I guess, in many cases. So I love this idea of thinking about, this is real people making real decisions in the heat at the moment, and so let's take the challenge out by giving them step-by-step processes they can follow, so that I guess, one, you get the right outcome, but two, they can feel reassured that it's okay to make that decision.
Absolutely. It's not, and it's really tough to understand how that process goes down until you're involved with it. But, you also get the ego involved. There are people that get involved with these things that might not have the experience to think, oh, yeah, I can do this. This is fine. But they don't really, in the heat of the moment, they don't think about the next 10 things that are about to happen once they've made that decision. Well, what's the crowd going to do? How's the crowd going to react when that decision's made? And what's the consequence of that? So, you have a thunderstorm coming to site, there's lightning, you've got 20,000 people in front of a big metal stage with big towers everywhere. What's the decision-making process when that thunderstorm approaches? How are you going to evacuate the people? Where are you going to evacuate them to? I hope you've got all your evacuation routes, planned and ready. I mean, that's basic 101, but it's the decision of when to evacuate them and how to evacuate them that really is critical. But it's also that point at which the human ego kicks in and goes, oh, no, maybe we'll be all right. Or maybe, if I evacuate them now, I'm probably going to look a little scaredy cat because the storm's so far away, right? But it takes a long time to evacuate 20,000 people from a site in the middle of a show as a thunderstorm's approaching. Half an hour doesn't actually feel like a really long time when you're in that process. So is evacuating a half an hour early too soon? We've evacuated sites and the storm's gone around us and you have, God, did I make the wrong mistake? It's like, well, no, because if it hadn't gone around us, then it's my responsibility to have made that decision in a timely manner. So you've got to be able to understand your place, where the ego checks out, the processes and protocols. And that's something that you get with years of experience and years of training in those circumstances. But it's not for everyone either.
And I guess I was sort of tying back what you were saying there with the kind of youthful excitement of being part of the show. And obviously, everybody is motivated to want to put the show on, right? You wouldn't be working in this industry if you weren't sort of wanting to put that show on. And so the natural tendency, I guess, probably, it's good to a certain extent, anybody that's been responsible for organizing something wants to see it through. But I guess here, because you're dealing with human emotion, that's what you're tapping into to put on the experience. I guess that temptation to keep things going is going to be greater.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to be the guy that killed the joy of 20, 50, 100,000 people, right? Nobody wants to be that person. And so your gut is always there going, maybe we should hold out, or maybe this will be okay. Or, you don't want to have to stop it. And that's why it is so important to have those procedures and protocols in place to take that emotion out of it. And so it becomes a quite simple, process-driven, is this happening? Yes. Is that happening? Yes. Then do this. It's not, well, feel for the 20,000 people whose night I'm about to ruin, or the artist who's just flown across the world to be here to perform and, will be absolutely ropeable that somebody walked on and told them to stop. That, if you start thinking about all those factors, then you'd never be able to make a decision. You'd just be sitting there going, I'm out. What am I going to do? But you follow the process and the procedures, and you've briefed everyone beforehand, and they're all crystal clear on what that process is. So it now becomes just a box ticking exercise of, yes, we did that. Yes, we did that. Yes, we did that. And I'm going to cap some shit, but here's my processes. And there's nothing, everyone agreed on that beforehand. Right, the insurer, well, hopefully you've talked to your insurer, the venue, the client, the person with all the money in the game, they've all gone through the processes. They've supported you in agreeing that that is what is going to happen at that moment in time. And therefore, when you make those decisions, you're not making them in isolation. You're making them with support of the greater group of people. We'd have artists actually sign the show stop procedure to say they acknowledge it and respect it, that if the dedicated representative walked on stage and held their arms up, that they would stop, right? And they're bought into the process and they agree that the risk is too greater. There have been too many situations around the world where people have died because artists haven't stopped. So thankfully in this day and age, most professional artists very responsible and have people on their team who are dedicated to the safety of the crowd and ensuring that the show stops in a responsible manner.
You've kind of hinted at this, that there's clearly an adrenaline rush that goes with this stuff, which must be an amazing thing to go through. Like the build up to a show, you put it on, amazing. But you've also talked about how that can lead to burnout. And I'm fascinated about the sort of emotional roller coaster of these things, because I mean, everybody will have stress in their roles, but this strikes me as being something where you're building up to a big crescendo in every sense, I guess. And then there's a sort of the come down piece. So the emotional roller coaster on this, the demands on people, and not just the artist, everybody that's involved in it, that's quite intense.
It is. And a lot of people work incredibly hard. I mean, I know when I was touring, we would work till 4 or 5 in the morning pulling out a show, and then we'd go back to the hotel, you'd have a quick shower, throw your stuff in your suitcase, jump on the tour bus, go to the airport, fly to the next city, and start building the next show for the next night. And you would catch some sleep, you'd catch some sleep on the way to the hotel on the bus, you'd catch some sleep, probably on the bus to the airport, you catch a bit of sleep on the plane, but you would then, you'd then be thrown in a situation where you're building the event for the show that night, and you would probably, grab an hour's sleep on the floor of a dressing room somewhere or something, wrapped in a blanket you'd seen from a football player that had left over in a stinky locker. But firstly, you get extreme tiredness and emotion playing into a lot of these large touring crews because the schedules are quite brutal at times. But then you also get, there is a lot of adrenaline because people are being asked to do a lot in a short space of time. A lot of these big tours, huge amounts of equipment, crew, and it moves at a very fast pace. And then all of a sudden you're into the show and you're delivering this amazing experience for, thousands and thousands of people. And that's quite high. And then you're packing it up and moving again. So there's this huge roller coaster of emotion and putting the body through things that not a lot of people are meant to do. And, so burnout becomes a real thing. And thankfully nowadays it's becoming more talked about and mental health issues in our industry are becoming more talked about. But for many years they haven't been, and there's a really huge void of this taboo topic of burnout and stress and mental health within the industry that people just they don't acknowledge because it's part of the lifestyle, if you like. And nowadays, I think it's important for people to make sure there are processes in place to minimise the impact on people, on the crews and the teams behind these events as much as possible.
And as you talk in those terms, part of me just went, hold on a minute. There are people here putting on events that have huge safety requirements. There's lots of physical equipment, right? There's sort of the potential for something to go wrong, given that what you're just the physical stuff that you're dealing with, let alone anything else, is quite big. And so it strikes me that sort of there's a real tension there between I understand fully why you have to keep a show. Right? It's very expensive to run a tour, right? So you want to do as much as you can in the shortest possible period of time because you're paying for all this stuff. So the economics of tours makes sense to keep. You couldn't have like a 2-day break between all the time because that would just not work. But there's those dynamics that you've talked about put huge amounts of pressure on the people that are there, and many of whom are operating in what one might term as safety critical environments. I mean, there's a real tension there, right?
Of course, there's and again, it's getting better, especially on the big tours nowadays, where they do have mandated breaks, and the safety is becoming a real factor. But there are still, mid and small level tours that run still on the smell of an oily rag, especially in this day and age where it's quite a hard marketplace. There are a lot of the mega tours that are really succeeding quite well, but the next level down is all the sort of, they're struggling. They're not making the money that they were making pre-COVID. Festivals, especially in Europe, Australia, US, they're not doing as well as they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. and every dollar counts. So people are being pushed as far, if not further, than they were before. And there's these people that are working huge shifts, but have massive safety responsibilities that don't necessarily have the support they probably should have from their clients and people like that, giving, backup and breaks and that sort of thing. So it's been a problem for many years in this industry, and it's still is to somewhat, but again, it's about creating awareness and, hopefully helping some people to understand that there are ways to put processes in place to talk to people about it if you're feeling burnt out or if you don't think something's safe. Because again, we come back to the show must go on mentality, and it's been like for many years, we'll just get in there and do it. The show's got to go on, get the job done, and you can rest when you're done. But most people in this industry are also freelance or casual or go from gig to gig. So they don't necessarily get that downtime because they need to make a living. And, for a lot of people, there's a season. So it might be, summer where there's a lot of outdoor events, and that's their time in the year to make money. So they just push themselves as hard as they can. So there's a lot of compounding factors that go into burnout and the stress and the day-to-day grind in the industry.
Which I think is great in what you write and what you put online is you're starting to talk about these things. And I feel like it's not exposing dirty secrets because this isn't sort of like child labor type stories, but you're going through and going, actually, we do need to talk about these things. We should be more upfront about them because that will allow us to run a more sustainable thing. And so you're doing, I guess, not exposing would be the wrong word, but you're highlighting some of these factors. That's one of your missions, I guess.
Yeah, it's a mission I kind of have fallen into by accident because I just put out a post one day on LinkedIn and got a huge response of people going, no one's talking about this. We love that you're talking about it. Can we talk about it more? It's like, well, yeah, I'll go. Frankly, now I own an event tech startup. I've got nothing to well, maybe I do have a lot to lose by talking about it, but I really don't. And I think it is one of those subjects where nobody talks about this stuff day to day. There are some great companies out there that do support their staff and do have the right processes and procedures in place and do have, redundancy built into their staffing. And that's fantastic. But I would say, especially from the feedback I get on my posts, that's a small minority of the overall industry, that there is a lot of work to do for people to have that feeling of support and that feeling of being able to address the stress and the emotion that goes into delivering these events, because burnout's a real thing and, it needs to be talked about more.
And I loved it as well because I thought this is a perfect conversation for social media. Because you want to put it out there, and it's a great way of getting to people that you might not necessarily be able to speak to directly. And I love the fact that it was, there's a lot of crap on social media, but I thought you were using it, not that you've set out with this, or as you say, it's an accidental mission, but it's like, it's the perfect sort of thing that you can put out there and see where it lands and share ideas and get people responding to it. And so I was still going to congratulate you as well and just say, this is what I think LinkedIn, for example, should be about, right? It's having these conversations. Let's not crap on about the obvious stuff or have stupid sort of like, thank God it's Friday type stuff. But you were getting to the heart of things. And I thought just not, it's the industry that you've come from, the industry that you love, but you were doing it in a way that was like, here's a conversation we ought to be having. And I'm gonna be the one to start it, and then just see who comes back. So it's really, really good use of social media, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is traditionally been to this date a lot of career opportunities, and there are a lot of great HR people posting, all these billboards and sayings with these. I can't think of one right now, but all these little HR fluffy memes, and that's great, and that's LinkedIn's background. But in our industry, that doesn't really translate because nobody sort of no one's relating to that stuff. So I've tried posting that stuff for a little while with my own take on it. And it's like, no, it's just, it's not relevant, right? People aren't feeling that HR fluff. They're feeling tired and emotional and drained it's the middle of concert season, or it's, they're trying to have a holiday and their client's texting them because they need to sell tickets tomorrow, right? You don't, it's a very different environment. And so for me, it's been about using LinkedIn, especially just to speak to an audience that's out there, that obviously I have an interest in connecting with that audience because I've got a tech startup and I'd love to, get some awareness of that. But it's also, I think it's turned into a little bit more than that, because what I've done is I've found these couple of taboo topics that people really relate to and resonate with. But it's like, well, if I can get some awareness, if I can get a conversation going, maybe that person's going to walk into their boss tomorrow and go, hey, look, we just have a chat about this. I'm feeling burnt out. We need to put some structure in place and some processes to support me, because then I'll do a much better job for you. So I'm not here criticizing the industry because people are burnt out. I'm here saying there's a better way to do this. People don't have to be burnt out. People don't have to be feeling stressed as much as they are, because we can put some really simple processes and procedures and measures into place and deliver better outcomes for everyone. And for me, it's just creating awareness about that by putting systems and procedures and policies into place. A lot of people aren't trained on that. A lot of people in this industry have done what they're doing for a long time and just have maybe developed their own systems, but don't understand that there's maybe a better system or a different system, or one that can support them better out there.
And it struck me you were almost giving permission to people to talk about this stuff. And I think if we look at one of the things that goes wrong in society, is like we don't talk about stuff. Whether that's mental health or whether that's sort of physical bullying, there's tons of environments where there's a sort of unspoken truth there. And I think it's really, really important just that, one of the things that we've learned is if we don't talk about stuff, it doesn't get better, right? It's just like the situation. And so I love the fact that you were just kind of like going, here is something, it happens, right? And I'm just going to stick it out there. And it's as you say, it's permission to talk about it.
Yeah, it's permission to talk about it, and it's permission to know that it's okay to talk about it. There should be nothing wrong in this day and age talking about your mental health or how you feel, or, I know if people come to us and and sort of say, okay, well, I'm not feeling great today. It's okay, well, what can we do to support you? Do you want to take some time off? Do you want to have a bit of a catch up and just talk about shit? We don't have to talk about work. What is it we can do to support you, and how can we, help you through this? And you don't know, when somebody comes to work in the morning, you don't know what's gone on the night before in their lives or over the weekend, or they're putting it possibly on a facade for work, but there's so much more going on in the background, and people don't talk about it across the board. I've been one of those people for my whole career, gone to work and tried to shut out my personal life and just be there for work. But the reality is the human doesn't work like that. I'm no psychologist, but I'm pretty confident that you can't just close the door when you walk in the office and have no interruptions from your personal life and feel the stresses that you're going through because your wife just left you, or the dog died, or something's happened, your partner's had a baby, or whatever it is. You can't just compartmentalize that stuff, and it's got to be okay to talk about it at every level. And I think that's kind of the mission I'm on, just to spark these conversations and just get people talking about how you can support, how you can be there, how you can put procedures and practices into place that help people do their job better, but in a safer environment, and then deliver a safer product for everyone at the events and at the concert or wherever they are.
As you were talking, I was thinking there's a perfect analogy here, right? Which is what you see on stage. There's also the backstage. Right? So if we thought about that in people's individual lives, right, the stuff that you don't see at work. So that if you thought the work is on stage, and the sort of private life is the backstage stuff, the backstage stuff needs to be working, right? We need to be in an okay place ourselves for us to be able to perform on stage. And so I love this. I love this idea of, go, as you say, going to work. And if you're having to fake it all day and pretend these things, that's like, if you get away with it, it's exhausting. So even if you manage to hold it together, the show goes on, if you like, that it's exhausting and it's going to drain you. But chances are things are going to slip. And so I love this idea of just being kind of honest about, you can only perform at work if everything else is okay. And if everything else isn't okay, and it's not going to be okay for all of us all the time. Back to the earlier conversations stuff isn't going to work out the way we planned it, right? We can all have illnesses, we can all have situations that befall us. And so I really like this idea of thinking about, for us to be, literally for us to be able to perform at work, we have to have that backstage to support us. And we have to, and when that starts to fail, cracks are going to appear.
Yeah, do you really want the person that's hanging hundreds of tons of steel and equipment above your heads in the roof of the arena? Do you really want that person having worked 36 hours straight and, their wife's at home with a baby and they're feeling absolutely, stressed and drained? Do you really want them up there in that situation? Or do you want somebody to be able to say, hey, you go home and deal with life. We've got replacements. The whole show isn't riding on you. It's okay to have to go. But there's just a lot of the time there's not that support in place. And likewise, the person running the emergency responses for the event and the critical incidents, you don't want them having no sleep and, being wired and stressed. You want them calm, comfortable, sitting back, sipping a cup of tea, feeling supported. And that's what it's about. It's about making sure that we have these conversations, we support these people, we put the processes in place to make sure that, that the whole show isn't riding on them. And we're not, I always say to people, we're not saving lives. It's not like we're out, in a battlefield or saving lives but if you don't do your job right, you'll certainly put a lot of people's lives at risk. And that you need to take into account. And that is something I don't think people necessarily think through as decisions are being made months beforehand in an office or in a boardroom. They're not like, okay, well, if we cut that number in the budget, what's the consequence on the ground? How does that relate to what the crews are going to feel if we cut that rule a line through that day off because it's costing too much money? And, we've done tours where we've had 1,000 hotel rooms a night, plus flights, plus per diems, right, 1,000 hotel rooms for a night. You think about the cost of running that year on year. It's huge for big shows, right? So ruling a line through a day off becomes financially very, very attractive. But you also need to think about the consequences of that decision at that point in time. Am I putting too much stress on the people who are delivering the show? Am I putting too much stress on the artist? Am I, what is the consequence of that? So they're the conversations I'm trying to spark. It's just some awareness of those decisions, consequences, supporting people. What can we do to make this a better environment? Put up a post yesterday about, event management is apparently one of the 5 most stressful jobs in the world. Year on year that these reports come out, the most stressful jobs in the world. It's like, military, first line response, event management, then pilots, or, they're always up there in the top 5. They just, we'll never get to 1 or 2 because it's never going to be more than first line or military, right? But our first responders or military. But it also shouldn't be in the top 5. We're actually doing something for people's enjoyment. Why the hell are we in the top 5 most stressful jobs? It doesn't make sense to me. But having been in that situation, it does. But if you, and quite a few people have responded to that post going, oh, this is bullshit. I don't understand why event management's so stressful. Well, Neither do I, to some extent. I mean, I do because of the decisions you have to make in the heat of the moment and the stresses and things like that. But again, I'll come back to it. You actually, if you support people properly, if you put the right procedures and policies in place, then it shouldn't be stressful. So we need to have these conversations, and we need to let people know it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's okay to say, well, maybe don't rule that line. If you can't give everyone a day off, let's look at another way we can make some money around this tour, because it's got to be sustainable.
Right. That risk isn't going to go away just because you put and I love it. It's interesting when you talk about those responses, Scott, because I guess on the face of it, without thinking about it, without having read something, I could sort of sit there and go, well, to your point, right? It's not going to be, how can that be stressful? All you're doing is putting on a show, right? So belittling it. But then you dig into the details and it becomes blindingly obvious when you think, and I think that's a really good illustration of the challenge, I guess, of having, say, accountants putting red lines through line. That feels like a big cost. Well, let's get rid of that. That seems wasteful, right? Not understanding the realities that's there. And I think all of this plays together, which is if we want to start solving these problems, get the best out of people, mitigate risk, all that stuff, we have to recognize the realities on the ground. And therefore, a sort of armchair critic or somebody that's miles away from the realities of it, of course, they're not going to understand that, right? I would argue that if I'm going to go and watch a show, I don't necessarily need to see what's going on backstage. I want, you may do things so that I feel safe, right? So there may be safety announcements, security checks, things that serve a purpose, but also on some level a bit performative, right? To demonstrate that you can trust us, and it almost show you that you can trust us because we've done those things. And governments might require that as part of the thing, but you have to almost go back to this analogy. You have to go back. You have to understand the detail of what's going on in order to be able to grasp it. And so these armchair critics, they go, that's a load of nonsense, right? What I love about what you're doing is you're unpicking that and saying, let me just show you why that's the case. And so I think if we want to have more honest conversations about these things, that requires us to understand, to get closer to the detail, right? And to speak to people that are actually doing this, as opposed to sort of helicopter or a kind of front of stage view. You don't see exactly what's going on behind the scenes. And that's really important if you want to understand these issues.
It is. It's incredibly important. And I think there's this magic that when you go to see a show, you really don't want to know what's going on behind the scenes, right? Because that takes away from the magic, whether it's the theatre or it's a concert, or you're there to be transformed and captivated and escape your life in some way for a night, or to enjoy a night out with friends, or whatever the reason you're there for is. But there's this magic that people put on as part of a show. And you don't want to think what's behind that magic, because that's going to ruin. You just want to trust that the people putting on the magic have done everything right, and that the thousands of kilos of equipment in the roof above you is all. You don't think about how we've hung that and what safety measures we've put in place to make sure that roof isn't going to collapse, or the stage isn't going to blow over in the wind, or we put all of that in because we want to keep everyone safe. But you're going to a show, you really don't. I hope people aren't thinking, well, am I safe? What's going to happen? I really want people to think, wow, this is incredible. How did they do that? This artist is the most amazing person I've ever seen perform, whatever it is. We should be in the background, not seen, but we also need to make sure that the people doing that magic are supported to make these events as safe as possible and get that full circle to bring people back to have enjoyment. And still in the news nowadays, there's still too many accidents in our industry where people hurt, injured, killed, and it's too regular. And I'm not blaming this on burnout. I'm not. There's many factors that go into what goes wrong at events, and it's not fair to say there's one contributing factor. Certainly, at no point is there ever. But at the same point in time, you need to make sure that the people that are planning the event have the right processes and everything in place for them to be as safe as possible.
It's probably a good time now to talk about what you're doing at the moment. Tell us a bit about your tech startup and what that does.
We help people to visualize what their event's going to look like before they set a budget. So we create very accurate 3D environments of events, show that people can walk around either, on virtually using their keyboard or with a set of VR glasses. So you can see exactly what the event will look like before you sign off on budgets, before you build it. So many times I've sat in an empty venue with people with clients that have gone, I didn't think it was going to look like that. Or could we just move that stage or that tent over a little bit? And it's built like it's, or we sit there at a concert in the stadium with seating plans going, oh no, this seat's obstructed. And there's all these seating relocations that go on. I mean, a lot of people that have gone to events have probably experienced this where you're met by an usher and they've gone, oh, sir, we're really sorry, your seat is not available tonight. We'll have to relocate you down to the floor or to another seat in another area. And that's because once we've got to the venue, we've built the show that nobody's actually thought, shit, there's a tower sitting between that seat and the stage, or they've got the tower in the wrong place, or, so we're really about taking that risk out and then creating better ROI opportunities for sponsors and broadcasters and stakeholders to increase their return on investment and identify areas that they can have better signage, have better engagement, get better coverage of for broadcast and things like that. So it's using a lot of technology that hasn't really been previously available until the last few years. It's also, I've spent a lot of time in the industry understanding the problems that occur. So we're working towards solving those problems in a very specific niche, which so far has been incredibly well received. We're 10 months old and we've got some amazing clients. We're delivering some amazing events around the world. We've just opened an office in Dubai. I'm off to America back to Dubai and America in a couple of weeks, opening up a branch in the States. So yeah, it's exciting. It's going from 35 years of event management and backstage production to running a global tech startup is crazy. Absolutely, insane. When my wife's my co-founder and we wake up some days just going, what are we doing? Like, are we doing the right thing? Are we, but we know we are, and we're really excited about it. Yeah, it's crazy, but it's fun.
And how do you go and scan the venue? How does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on the venue. A lot of venues have detailed plans in 3D that we can ingest. But say we're on a golf course, we'll scan the golf course in 3D with drones, so very high resolution fixed wing drones. We'll scan it, get the full terrain and everything to do with the golf course, ingest that in, and then we'll build the event model inside that environment. So people can literally, like a video game, they can navigate around, they can sit in seats, they can see, we can show the clients exactly what the view is going to look like up the fairway from the corporate suite. We can show the broadcaster what their camera angles, what lens, what camera they can use, what height the tower needs to be to get the shot they need up the fairway to the tee. We're able to show the sponsors 10 different signage options on the entry tent so they get the best opportunity and they're not standing there going, oh yeah, we didn't quite realize that wasn't going to be visible behind that tree. We can give people a lot of what we do is changing furniture around to make sure people have the right furniture in the corporate suites or the entertainment spaces, just being able to fully visualize what every piece of the element of the event is going to look like once it's installed, but being able to do that months out. So
I love that. I guess it all goes back to putting on a great show, right? Because you've removed the element of nasty surprises, right? No, pleasant surprises is one thing, right? But I'm guessing most of the time it's like, oh, actually, if we'd known, we wouldn't have done this or we'd have done it differently. And so you're removing that element, which I guess it's kind of risk management, but it's also, I guess, just putting on a better show. So I can see how you've come to this because it's entirely on brand with what you were talking about before, which is like we want to deliver the best possible thing, so everybody is happy with what we've done.
It's absolutely that, and there is so much money riding on these events nowadays. The cost of moving something on site, or if you've forgotten something, having to truck it halfway across the country, is mind blowing. We've worked with clients where we've saved trucking bills alone of hundreds of thousands of dollars because they don't need to travel all this equipment from site to site. So we're able to really reduce a lot of the stress that when people turn up at the event. And the client, I mean, I know there was one of the most stressful days before the event was the day the client walks on site. We'd spend weeks setting up and the client would walk on site and go. And clients in events industry, a lot of them tend to be very critical because they've spent so much time in the detail. So they won't necessarily always walk on site and go, wow, this is incredible. Let's just, they will arrive and focus on all the points that need improving, everything that's wrong. And at some point during the event, they'll tap you on the back and say, hey, well done. But generally when they first arrive on site, it's like, this is wrong, that's wrong, fix that, do that, boom, boom. And really we're aiming at being able to solve those problems because they're the things that cost money. But they also cost opportunity because while you're trying to fix those problems, you're not actually then building the event properly. You're not focused on developing the best possible event. You're focused on moving that tent or that stage or trying to fix the signage that didn't print exactly the way the client signed off on it because they did sign off on it, right? When they see it, it's like, oh no, that's not what I signed off on. But it is. No, it's not what I signed off on.
Yeah, you're right. So almost, I was thinking, as you're talking, it's like someone has a vision for what this is going to be like, and you're giving them that vision ahead of time. And I like that because one, it sort of means that they're on board. But secondly, you've given them the opportunity to comment. So you had the chance to look at this, right? And whatever the physical equivalent of going to print is, right? We can now call time on this. We're going to do this way, and you've been given the best possible opportunity to comment up front. And so I love removing, again, I can hear as you're talking, removing the stress of that final thing. Everybody knows what's happening. You've given a degree of comfort to people. So these are very basic human emotions, right? I have confidence that I know what this is going to look like. We also know that you're confident. So this is building, so it's a digital product, right? But it's dealing with very basic human emotions of sort of like, I want to know what's going on. I want certainty. And so delivering something there that really, I guess, removes, the loosest possible sense, removes human stress.
And we don't just allow them to comment, we actually allow them to go into the model and move it all around themselves if that's what they'd like to do. So we can give them a model where they can move tents and everything around. So you can move the corporate tent from place to place, sit in it, see what the view's going to be like and go, oh yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So it takes it to that next level because traditionally event planning has been very two-dimensional. So, a lot of CAD plans and then some renders showing, this is what it'll look like generally in 2D terms. But that, I know when we've done renders for people in the past, we make the render look good, so they'll sign off on it. You always make that angle look as good as you possibly can, but then it's not necessarily 100% what it's going to look like on the day. Whereas these models, we're so hyper accurate, it's very hard to fake. It's exactly what it's going to look like, and it's exactly where it says it's going to be. So you don't just get their permission, you get their buy-in, you get them engaged with the process, you get them really feeling like that it's their event, they're getting ownership of it because they've been able to go into these models, walk around it, understand it, show it to their bosses, get it all approved, and show it to the stakeholders and the sponsors and get them excited. And, we've got some pretty ambitious plans. We're looking at how we integrate crowd modeling to have people be able to move safer around these events. In a virtual space, we can see how crowds will react with different environments and spaces. So looking into the future, and these essentially, if people know what we're talking about, they're digital twins. And we're looking at how we integrate more data into these digital twin environments. because essentially that's what digital twins are. They're virtual representations of real world environments, and the digital twins are very data hungry. So the more data you can put into them, the better result you're going to get out the other end.
Wow. Just the way you're talking about it, you're really, I think given, and I know you're working incredibly hard because the hours that you've talked to me about them, but you're clearly enthused by this. And it's just such a delight to see. But this is clearly, you started by talking about passion. My sense is you've got a similar passion for this that got you into the industry in the first place.
Yeah, I do. I've got a really big passion for this. I think it is an untapped market area of the market, but I also think it's one that a lot of people get really excited about when we show them the work we're doing. They're like, this is incredible. Why have we never seen this before? Where's it been hiding? It's just that technology's only just developed enough for us to really be able to capitalize it at the scale that makes it worthwhile. But previously the cost to entry was so high, and the events that it would serve were so small. But now we're getting the cost to barrier to entry is coming down, and the scale of what we can put into these digital twins, the technology is supporting to raise up, so we can get into those bigger events. We can now model full golf courses. We can model full stadium environments. We can model those stadium environments full of people moving and interacting with the environment, which a few years ago, there just wasn't the processing power to be able to deliver that at an affordable level for event delivery. So, yeah, it's something I'm very passionate about. I think it's something that in the long term will make events safer, that will make everybody's job so much easier because we're all crystal clear on what it is that's being delivered and how it's being delivered. And I think it's something that we talk to the industry a lot about, pretty well every day I'm talking to people, and the people we show it to get really, really excited by what we're doing. And that sort of elevates us and lifts us up, because when people are excited about what you're doing, you have hope and you're on the right track. And we've got some pretty good clients to date, which also helps. And we're bootstrapped. My wife and I have so far funded all of this, so we don't have any outside investment yet. Yeah, crazy. Absolutely insane. I don't know what I was thinking, but we're just getting to the stage now where we're like, I think we're going to have to get it just to the next level. So, but we've for the last we've officially launched at the start of July last year, but we've been working on this for a couple of years now and really putting all the pieces together and investing in developing the technology and the processes to get us to where we are today. So it's been a big journey, but it's one we're really pumped about.
Wow. Amazing. Well, I'm very conscious of your time, Iain, and you've been very generous with it, as you are on LinkedIn as well. Before I let you go, tell anybody that's interested in finding out more, how do they find out more about you and what you do?
They can go to my LinkedIn, Iain Morrison, and maybe we can put a link in the show notes or something. And it's Iain Morrison. Or they can go to our website, which is theimaginationcollaborative.com.
And unsurprisingly, it's a very cool website, given what you I guess you have to have a really slick, cool looking website, but it's great fun to go in and have a look at. So it's the sort of place I sort of went to have a look at it to do some research. I was like, oh, this is really cool. But then I thought it kind of ought to be given the nature of what you're doing. And it definitely delivers on that front. Iain, I want to say thank you firstly for like grabbing my attention on LinkedIn on a subject I wasn't expecting to have it grabbed on. And you've held it, and every one of your posts is one of those must read things. So I'm delighted for that. And thank you for spending the time. I know I'm not the direct target audience, but I think people could learn a ton of things. One, about the way you're going about doing it, but secondly, the subjects you're talking about don't just relate to that industry. So well worth following for all of those reasons. But secondly, thank you for being an amazing guest on the show. I've really learned some things and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Christian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you reaching out. It's been awesome connecting. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks as ever to you for listening and to Iain for appearing. To find out more about Iain and his venture, the Imagination Collaborative, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, where have you been? But thank goodness you found us. Thank you so much for joining. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. The show is available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like what you've heard, please do leave a review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to the show on. It really does help. It lets other people discover the show and continues to allow me to attract high-quality guests like Iain. If you don't like the show, then just ask yourself why you listened this far. Because, as we've explored in the episode, the show doesn't always have to go on. To discover episodes of the show that you might have missed, visit the website humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of the podcast, but in the meantime, stay safe and maybe take a moment to think about when in life the show really does have to go on and when perhaps it shouldn't. But above all, thank you so much for listening.